Hello everyone, glad to see you again for this video. So, today we're going to look at a particular type of survival food ration. So these are rations that we'll call, in quotes, helping hand rations. So these helping hand rations, which can be described as tactical rations, are meant to feed us. For a short period, 72 hours maximum, we'll see why. So these rations will allow us to use our maximum potential without slowing us down. So we'll see by which principles. In survival situations, we can use these rations, this type of ration, for a scheduled one-time movement, for an operation, or for an emergency evacuation, for example. We can also simply use these rations for a trek, for a hike that doesn't exceed 72 hours. I brought a sample menu today, a menu for 24 hours. So let's take a look together at what it consists of. We'll look at the main principles used to set up these rations. Knowing, of course, that everyone can adjust the different elements according to their tastes and needs. We'll also see that their composition is a little surprising compared to usual rations. This is to meet their specific purpose and for good reasons. Generally, when preparing rations, one of the main factors is to look for fairly balanced menus that are high in calories. Here, our goal will be to minimize the resources consumed, minimizing what we carry, the weight, and the bulk that could slow us down or work against us. Above all, by eating only foods the body can use immediately, with no energy loss. So over 3 days, we're going to focus our diet on efficiency and worry much less about a balanced or dietary nutrition, which should normally be followed throughout the year. So I have to say that this video is not intended to replace the advice of a nutritionist, a dietitian, or even a chef. But the rations, as we will see them today, have proven themselves in the field and are meant to be useful. And it's this effectiveness that will interest us. Even though these rations can certainly be improved, there are a few main principles that we will use for preparing these rations. First, focus on a diet richer in carbohydrates and fats and lower in proteins over a few days, because in the short term, proteins are not as bioavailable as other nutrients. When metabolized and converted into energy, proteins will burn about 25% of the calories. They contain their own calories. So in the end, you have a large loss, which will be much smaller for carbohydrates and even negligible for fats. It's said that proteins are costly in terms of energy. Proteins are important for long-term muscle building, for example, but very little of the energy used by muscles in the short term comes from ingested proteins, about 3%. Carbohydrates and sugars are absorbed very quickly, and they are sources of energy that can be mobilized immediately, which is very beneficial for us. By the way, carbohydrates are also the main source of energy for the brain, and sometimes that can be useful. With stress, when it happens, we sweat a lot, we urinate a lot, and the risks of dehydration are very high. Micronutrients in these cases, which are found in vegetables and in split carbohydrate intake, meaning the sugars we consume throughout the day. Fructose intake, especially dried fruits, is the best way to retain water and facilitate hydration. You should know that retaining water will allow you to drink less and walk for longer periods, so that you can go all the way and accomplish what you need to do. So, we'll also take calories into account, of course, but we won't focus specifically on that aspect, because over a short period, once again, being on a slightly hypocaloric diet will paradoxically give you energy. It will allow you to never feel weighed down by a heavy meal, and it will help you anticipate fatigue that could be caused by difficult digestion, for example. Be careful, you will still need your daily minimum. Here, in our ration, for example, we have more than 2,200 calories. We'll look at that in detail. So we'll also avoid anything that's fatty. Prepare dishes that are systematically found in canned foods or in various standard rations, for example, things like pâtés, animal fats, etc. For better absorption, we'll also make sure to split up our intake throughout the day. That's generally possible in the field. So, we'll also try to put together our ration with foods that can be eaten as they are. either raw or rehydrated with cold water, or even rehydrated with hot or boiling water. So as much as possible, all our foods need to be edible in any situation or under any conditions. One last little thing to note is that after spending a few days on this diet, it's recommended to switch back to your usual diet while slightly increasing your protein intake in the following week. So see if that's still relevant. Well, it's just a detail to keep in mind. So let's take a closer look at this sample menu. Now I have a portion here for 24 hours, which is about 600 grams. So we can already see that in terms of weight, we're at half of a standard French combat ration. So we can already see that carrying 3 days worth of food won't really be a problem, neither in terms of weight nor in terms of bulk. You'll be able to benefit from good autonomy, and that's already very important. So here, everything is vacuum packed, then put into a large Ziploc, a resealable bag, so you can store items that will be opened and consumed several times. For vacuum packing, I use a basic home machine. That's more than enough. For the morning, you'll have 60 grams of oatmeal flakes, about 200 and 220 calories. Here, some nuts. Some dried pineapple, you have about 200 calories here, plus some instant coffee, extremely light. So for breakfast with this menu, you'll preferably need hot water, but 2/3 of the calories can actually be consumed without water. In the meantime, a proper break to heat some up for lunch. Now, we're going to talk about a topic that's going to be important if you want to optimize the weight and bulk of your rations. So, of course, you can use freeze-dried products, which are interesting, but they're expensive and will contain additives, colorants, artificial flavors, etc. All these are products whose presence you can't control and which, for manufacturers, are meant for preservation and recreating flavors. So instead of using freeze-dried products, I'm going to use a home food dehydrator, which will allow me to make my preparations on demand and at a lower cost. We saw it in our ration. Vegetables and fruits, especially dried fruits, are going to be important, and they will have a great benefit, which is often not well known. You should know that once dehydrated, some vegetables will contain a large number of kilocalories per gram of dry matter. Sweet potato, for example, contains 5.4 kilocalories per gram of dry matter once well dehydrated, whereas regular dry rice usually contains only 3.5 kilocalories per gram. This information will therefore be important to guide our choices. To optimize the weight of the bag, we will focus as much as possible on foods whose calorie-to-dry weight ratio is favorable. For 1 gram of dehydrated dry matter, I'm looking for the maximum amount of calories. At the end of the video, you'll have a table that gives you some values for the most common vegetables, for those who are interested. Here, I have 24 grams of vacuum-sealed dehydrated sweet potatoes. This corresponds to 150 grams of fresh sweet potatoes and 129 kilocalories. For this sweet potato, I first did a quick cooking, then I dehydrated it with a basic device for about 10 hours. You can dehydrate foods that can be eaten as they are, like mushrooms or apples, directly without cooking. But it's better to cook in advance the foods that usually need to be cooked before being eaten. Still with this example, if you dehydrate sweet potato directly at less than 42 degrees for 10 hours without boiling it first, you will dehydrate it while keeping almost 100% of its nutritional qualities. But you'll need to boil it on site in the field for it to be truly edible. So for the operational aspect, it's better to do this work beforehand, even if it means losing some minerals and vitamins in the process. By steaming them, you'll preserve the minerals and a few extra vitamins if you want. So here, this preparation can be rehydrated and eaten in 2 or 3 minutes if it's placed in very hot water. Here, I added salt and pepper inside directly. On the other hand, if you put it in cold water, it will take between 15 and 20 minutes before it's fully rehydrated and loses all its crunchiness. So this vacuum-sealed preparation, with this packaging, it can be kept for years. It can also be eaten as chips if needed. And of course, you can add spices or wild plants to improve the taste. Repeat this process for all fruits and vegetables. So, for lunch, as always, we have a mix of button mushrooms and green beans that will be eaten as soup, which can be mixed together. We have vacuum-packed rusks, 4 rusks, apple, fresh dehydrated apple, and coffee. The mushrooms go straight into the dehydrator, while the canned beans, already pre-cooked and salted, are dehydrated too. Here, you can choose to do this directly with fresh ingredients when you have time, if you prefer. So, for the purposes of the video, I made very simple mixes of only 2 vegetables together, which allows me to calculate the calories very easily. However, in practice, you can easily mix 5 or 6 vegetables, add spices, and you'll have things that are much more interesting in terms of taste. For example, a can of green beans weighs 480 grams, showing the weight gain. Basically, you have 250 grams of green beans inside, which are drained, and in the end, 20 grams of dehydrated green beans, which are strictly identical nutritionally. 480 grams, 20 grams. So, count on 8 hours in the dehydrator at 42 degrees for canned green beans. Here we have fresh dehydrated apple, which could be rehydrated or can be eaten as chips for a snack. Store-bought cashews and dried banana, but it could be homemade dried banana. So, a principle that we will often use in the field, even if we're still far from the classic standards of nutrition. We prefer to eat very lightly at noon and eat a bit more in the evening, so we can stay very alert and active during the day. It's worth noting that this so-called low-protein diet still contains all the proteins, just less concentrated, but present in plant-based foods. For dinner now, sardines and olive oil. So here, it's the exception in terms of animal protein in this meal. That's a choice I made for the evening. Sardines are very easy to digest, so it's a pleasure that will also be a big source of calories for the whole day. So we could do without it by increasing the rest a little bit. So to finish, and to go with the sardines, we'll have 6 rusks and also a soup, possibly with Brussels sprouts. Carrots then for 15 grams, 62 calories, and finally dried apricots for 80 kcal. As for water, which is not part of the ration, today, decontamination tablets are still used when you want perfect sanitary safety. The different filters are becoming more and more efficient, but none of them perfectly filter out all viruses. So it remains a matter of judgment and choice in the field. Thanks to the filters, we have fewer and fewer problems getting our drinking water in the field with minimal risk. That's a big improvement. It allows us to quickly rehydrate vegetables with cold water if necessary in any condition, and with a sanitary level that's often very good. So if you have an operation planned, you can prepare this kind of ration 24 hours in advance. That's enough. It allows you to properly calibrate your menus for the operation in question. Everyone can make them their own way, based on their tastes, and add whatever they like. Don't forget the fundamental principles on which these rations are based. So we focus on immediately available macronutrients because that's what will allow us to perform better in the situation. If you want to go a little further in the field, don't hesitate to visit the Survey Formation website. You'll see the courses currently offered there. In the meantime, I'll see you soon here or in future videos.